everybody. Welcome. Let's get started. We don't want to miss any of the discussion here because it's going to be fascinating. My name is Jennifer Rogers. I'm the director of the Center for the Advancement of Public Integrity. And if you don't know us, since we're still relatively new, please check us out on our website. We have a big Global Cities Conference coming up in a couple of weeks and some projects on simplicity if you're in need of pro bono hours, so check us out. I want to thank our co-sponsors for this event, the National State Attorneys General Program, headed by Jim Tierney over here, who's going to speak in just a moment, the Society of Law and Ethics, and specifically Nassim Ameli, who's really kind of came up with the idea for this program and took the laboring oar, so thank you. Also, Social Justice Initiatives, which is co-sponsoring with us. Rachel Polly is there in the back. She's the Director of Government Programs, and if any of you is interested in working for the government, either directly after law school or somewhere down the road, please go speak to Rachel about that. And finally, our CAPB's corporate sponsor for our speaker series this semester, Deborah Boyce and Clifton. So thank you all, and I'll turn it over to Jim Tierney for more substantive introductions and then the discussion.
Thank you, Jennifer. My name is Jim Tierney. I'm the former Attorney General of Maine, among other things. But for the last 15 years, I've run something here at Columbia Law School called the National State Attorneys General Program. And in this program, stateag.org, we have basically become the world's expert on state attorneys general, how they work, how they think, how they operate. And after you've checked with Rachel, if any of you are interested in state attorneys general, either as employment or you're interested intellectually, we generate a lot of academic articles, seem to run across my desk. Please come and visit with us and see us. We're very proud of what we do, just as we're very proud of our two speakers here today. We have a governmental system which basically consists of two competing, or we have an economic and government system competing two different motions. On the one hand, we have an economic system where we want people to accumulate wealth. We help them. That's one of the things you learn here at law school. And with more wealth, you have more influence. And that's the way it's supposed to be. And we also have a governmental system where we're all supposed to be treated the same, where that's the essence of democracy, that it really doesn't make any difference who you are or how much wealth you have. We're all supposed to have the same sort of equal influence. Now, that's never been a pure division in our country's history. We know that. But we do see, in light of a series of decisions by the United States Supreme Court on campaign financing, that those scales have been dramatically tipped so in order to increase the influence of those who have over the men and women who actually go out and try to run for office and raise the kind of money that it takes to run for office. I did this myself a long time ago. I was the Attorney General. I raised and spent $1 million in my little state of Maine a long time ago. And after I lost that particular election, I stayed on as Attorney General. But I do have a lot of first-hand experience in asking people for money and know why they give and why they don't give. But the question should not come from to me unless you really care a lot about Maine. Instead, they should go to our two fabulous speakers. Our first speaker is going to be Doug Gansler. Doug is a graduate of Yale College, the University of Virginia. He clerked for a federal judge. He's worked in the private sector, but he spent a lot of time as an AUSA in Washington. He then went out, campaigned for, and was elected Montgomery County District Attorney, where he served for 8 years. He then was elected twice to be the Attorney General of Maryland. While he was there, he was also president of the National Association of Attorneys General and had extensive experience not just in Maryland but around the country. He'll be our first speaker. Our second speaker, and I've always said if I ever wanted to hire someone to prosecute, if I needed somebody prosecuted, I would hire Doug Gansler. Our speaker after him, and Peter, I want you to just come up after Doug finishes, is Peter Harvie. He's a graduate of Columbia Law School, class of '82, graduate of Morgan State. Before that, he's originally from Alabama. Peter also clerked for a federal judge, worked for a long time in the federal system as an AUSA, and then went over and became the chief deputy and then the Attorney General of New Jersey. Like Doug, he is now in private practice, and I've always said if I ever needed to hire somebody to defend me, then I would hire Peter. This is like a no call. This is not even a close call. So they're both going to comment about why they took part of their lives, professional lives, to spend it in government, And then secondly, they're going to talk about where they were in government, they found ethical issues that were difficult for them personally and for others. Now remember, ethics, when we talk about ethics, it's not necessarily the law. Lawyers love rules. But ethics are oftentimes the decisions you make when no one will ever know. No one will ever know how you decided them. And that is the difference, I believe, between the straight legal analysis where you do what you can do and ethics where you're supposed to do what is right. So let's start and give a warm Columbia welcome to the former Attorney General of Maryland.
What do you want? Should show. Should I go up there or here?
Totally
All right, I'll
up
go
here.
up there.
Up there for your remarks and then down here for the questions. How about that? And I'm a tough moderator, so because we're going to have a lot of questions, so let's shoot for
So
10
just
minutes.
don't talk too long.
Yeah, that's my... Yeah.
Well, thank you all for being here. I admire you coming. I wouldn't have done this in law school, so I appreciate you taking the time and effort to show up when you don't have to. And it's exciting for me actually to be at Columbia. As Jim went through my record, I've been trying to come here forever. I keep saying, why don't you ever invite me to Columbia? I'm really excited to come to Columbia. I could not have come here. I played lacrosse at Yale. And this is the only Ivy League school without a lacrosse team, so I never would have actually gotten into Columbia. So this is my excitement. My other piece of Columbia news is my grandfather went to Columbia. And he passed away a couple years ago at 100 and a half, and he used to say, these people talk about the Depression, they think it was so bad. Let me tell you how bad it was. Columbia men were selling apples on the corner. And so that is like the lowest of low. You knew it was bad when that was the case. And he actually lived with Lawrence Wien, and I guess that was his roommate for the entire time he was at Columbia. That's who the football stadium's named after. My Uncle Larry was named after him. So I've just exhausted my Columbia knowledge, and I also want to thank, Columbia has a really special treasure here in former Attorney General Tierney. Nobody else has this. There is no other Attorney General practice institute in the country, and Columbia is just lucky to really have this, because particularly now, and we'll probably get into a lot of this, the role of the Attorney General and state regulation, state enforcement, and state power is continually growing as people on Capitol Hill can't agree whether today's Thursday or not. The Attorney General and the state side is really becoming increasingly more powerful. Jim came down and visited me right after I got elected and has helped me as a mentor through my time as Attorney General. I am a little mad at him right now, the second, because when he said, when you need a prosecutor, I've been a prosecutor for 22 years, when you need a prosecutor, you should hire me. When you need a defense lawyer, you should hire Peter. But I'm actually in the business now defending people and defending companies. I need business, so I need you to kind of change that shtick a little bit, if you would. And Peter Harvie is obviously a graduate of here, and it's just an honor for me to be with him today on this panel. When I was president of the National Association, we actually gave an award out to the former AG who had contributed the most to the success of Attorneys General. They call them SAGE, Society of Attorneys General Emeritus, which I am now one. And people say if you're lucky, you are a SAGE member longer than you're an Attorney General member. That has just to do with staying alive. And so Peter has been a SAGE member for some time and is very active in helping AGs. So with that, I guess my opening remarks are supposed to be sort of what drove me and how did I get into politics and government. And it's actually interesting. I graduated in Yale in 1985, and it's interesting only because I had this conversation yesterday with two of my college roommates who are just stupid rich. I mean, they don't work anymore. They're retired. Can you imagine? I'm not that old, 52, and they haven't worked for years. Because when I came out of college, Wall Street, right here in New York, was throwing money at us. Just, you can walk, talk, you went to Yale, here's a ton of money to go work in a Wall Street bank. And very few people in my class actually went into government service. I'm about to have my 30th reunion. At my 25th reunion, I was the only person in my 1,260 people in my class at Yale to be elected to anything. Now, if you think of all the presidential elections we've had recently, somebody from Yale's in it. And that used to be the sort of public service, community service, is what you were taught at college and law school. Well, it really changed at that time. And I'm really glad I did it. And there's a different currency, obviously. The currency you have in public service is to help people. And so when Sunday night comes along, and tomorrow morning's Monday, instead of having to go work for some law firm and you get paid a lot, where the entire currency, the agenda, what your goals that day are how many hours you can bill in 6-minute intervals, and what clients can you bring in so some person that's been sitting around there longer thinks you've done a good job. That's how you get promoted. Instead of that being the goal, you get to figure out who to help. What is a problem in the world and how can you solve it? Because somewhere in those law books, now they don't have books anymore, but back in my day they had things called books. And in those books, there's a case, there's a page that will help you fix that problem. Whether it's the minority achievement gap in education, whether it's a housing problem, things you wouldn't think would traditionally come under the Attorney General, you can do a number of things as Attorney General. So I've loved doing it. I did it, as Jim mentioned, I was an assistant United States Attorney under Eric Holder for 6 years. I was a state's attorney for 8 years and been Attorney General for 8 years. We've got 2 people from Maryland, which I'm excited. They sat in the front row, which is very nice of them, in case we need a loud cheer. But it's really a wonderful thing to be able to help people and to use the law as a powerful tool to help people. So that is sort of my story, and now I'm in the private sector. I'll do that for a while, maybe get back into government at some point, either elected or appointed. But because I love doing it, and I'm sure you hear all the time, sort of stay, don't drink and drive, stay in school kind of lecture. I don't think you could hear it enough that you really should consider public service. And it's alluring, and I understand that the albatross of today is student debt, and you got to make money, and I get that. And maybe you do that for a couple years, but because you want to pay off that debt. But don't get caught up in it. They're always going to dangle more money in front of you, and better hotels and better little trips and stuff. But at the end of the day, when you look back and you figure, what did I do? Well, I made some money. I got a big number in some bank book somewhere. Or did you help a lot of people? Or did you use your Columbia Law degree to try and help as many people as you could to make their life better? And I would argue you want to take door number 2 at the end of the day. So do you want? That was sort of my opening spiel. Unless you want me to say some more.
Well, why don't you do your opening spiel, then we'll go to the ethics. How
Sweet.
about that? So why don't you go ahead. Peter, why don't you
Peter
do
did a
that?
great job. Just pretend they're cucumbers. Don't get nervous.
It's always hard following General Gansler. Doug, my friend, it's always good to be with you. He and I met at a bar in Providence at a NAG meeting, and it just shows you that at a certain point, if you have your mind and heart open to new relationships and new friendships, you can make some very deep ones that last for many, many years. And I have no doubt that Doug and I will be inextricably intertwined until we transition to the other world. So we're here to talk
Kinda
about
eerie.
life. So why government service? When I, like you, sat mostly where you are, but in far more Spartan conditions, because the law school looked terrible in those days. It occurred to me that there were things to do in life, and I always wanted to be a lawyer because I grew up in Tuskegee, Alabama, and if you have ever read the seminal case in racial gerrymandering, Gamillion versus Lightfoot, well, Dr. Gamillion was not only from my town, but that was my city. That was part of that case, Tuskegee, Alabama. Dr. Gamillion went to my dad's church. And when I looked around and saw people like that, I realized that there is more to this in life than, as Doug points out, making money. Your legacy, whatever you make it, will be the result of what you invest in the world and what you invest in other people. I walked on campus today and saw the signs for Selma. I was a little kid when that march took place. And I remember at Tuskegee Institute, now Tuskegee University, it had maybe 2,600 students. 1,000 students from Tuskegee went down to Montgomery when the marchers came. Now I want you to think about that. That's more than a third of the student body, almost half. Got on buses and went to Montgomery. My mother, who was dean of the School of Nursing at Tuskegee and founded the first baccalaureate degree program in nursing in the state, before Albany, before Alabama, before anyone, took her nurses down to attend to the marchers at the state capitol. And when you watch the film Selma, they'll give you a back shot of the actor playing King. If you look closely, you'll see a red brick building off his left shoulder. That red brick building was the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. That's how close it was to the Capitol. So when you watch King give these speeches, you have to understand he's literally the distance between here and the 116th Street subway station from the state capitol. I'm talking about the state capitol where Jefferson Davis took the oath of the Confederacy. That state capitol. In a state where state troopers would kill you and nothing would happen. In broad daylight, nighttime. In fact, some of them, as it was true with law enforcement, were part of the Klan. So for me, it always was, as I sat where you sit today, what do I do next? And so I learned about this thing called the U.S. Attorney's Office, which I had never heard of, and I did an internship there. We had something then called work study. I'm sure it doesn't exist now, where you actually worked and they paid you for it, but you had these internships. And so those are the kinds of experiences. I spent one semester with a U.S. District Court judge in Manhattan, who later went to the Second Circuit. And one of the things I learned was, look, as a young lawyer, you can get into the fray and learn a lot. You may not make a lot of money, but in public service, you can learn a lot. And in learning a lot, then you are challenged to do something with all of that knowledge. What I can tell you is it has been a remarkable task. It's been a lot of fun. And on the question as well of what you do next, you have to figure that out for yourself. I mean, you can go to law firms, and I don't discourage it. Go and learn your skills. Try to learn as much as you can. But at a certain point, you're going to get bored. At a certain point, I suspect, you're going to want a little bit more in life than money. And I can tell you this, everything you buy is going to get old. And the only thing a lot of money will get you is more of the same. You'll have a lot of something. You'll have multiples of something. And at the end of your days, you don't want your life defined by trinkets and things that are rusted. And if you have any doubt that a lot of what you seek in life will become completely irrelevant, the next time you go home, go to your attic. Go to your basement and watch all the crap you had to have that your parents have stored away in a closet somewhere. So the point of the matter is, it's rewarding, it's satisfying, it's exciting. You will learn a lot, you will give a lot. And the legacy that you develop, ultimately, will depend largely on what you invest, not in so much in yourself, but what you invest in other people and what you do for other people.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to ask the first question because the title here is Attorneys General Lawyering for Whom? And it reminds me of the line there used to be a U.S. Senator from Louisiana named Russell Long, and he would tell his people, he'd say, if you vote for me, you're going to get good government. And they said, well, what if I contribute to campaign? He says, you're going to get more good government. All right, so there we come the issue. The attorneys general are elected statewide. Peter was not. He was appointed in New Jersey, but Doug was elected twice statewide in Maryland. The question now becomes, in this world of no campaign finance world, lawyering for whom? How do you deal with the issue of being politically viable, raise the ungodly amounts of money that you need to do, and maintain your integrity as an attorney general where you have vast jurisdiction? And Peter, even though you weren't elected, you live in the state of New Jersey where fortunately we've never had any sort of corruption or ethical difficulty, certainly. But maybe just once or twice you may have noticed in passing while you were attorney general and while you were in the U.S. Attorney's Office that there had been some issues. So both of you, how do you, and this is not just on the state level, Peter also, of course, on the county and local level, there's a lot of stuff that allegedly happens in New Jersey. Could you talk about that? How do you do it yourself, personally? How do you hold on to your own ethical standards while at the same time you're running for office and enforcing the law? Lawyering for whom?
So there's 43 attorneys general today that are elected. The other 7 are not. 5 are actually appointed by the governor, as one of those being New Jersey. Interestingly, Maine is one of the others, which the attorney general is appointed by the legislature. then most of us, at least, that serve in the AG world feel the most qualified attorney general of them all is the attorney general that comes out of Tennessee. And the reason why that is because the Tennessee Supreme Court selects the attorney general. The former attorney general who served most of the time with me, he probably couldn't get elected in his own living room to anything, but he was the most qualified of all of us. He went to Princeton and Yale Law School and just was a phenomenal, ethical, wonderful attorney general. And so it really begs the question, so who gets elected attorney general? And to the end of your question, I think it differs significantly from every other elected office. And what was ironic somewhat was there was a recent series of articles here in the New York Times that really nobody paid attention to except for people in the orbit of the attorneys general, that is, the attorneys general themselves or the people who participate in the attorney general world, which we definitely want to talk about. And it was this, really riveting, deep, in-depth, granular look at the attorney general world, which actually said nothing other than the fact that attorneys general are lobbied. That is, elected officials are lobbied by people. Well, there's a news flash, but they made it, a big long series of stories, and it really said nothing. And the question is, how are you as attorney general different than every other elected official? And I think people do think of their attorney generals above or below or to the side of politics. And if you're an attorney general and you're not that way, you get in trouble. If you ever, as an attorney general, make a decision based on political considerations or who gave you what dollars, then that's when you're no longer attorney general. And unfortunately, we've seen some of those people come and go. 2 or 3 that were elected with me didn't survive. How long did Mark Dan last? Like a couple months? Yeah. I mean, these guys didn't last very long at all because of that. But the rest really do, whether you're Republican, Democrat, whoever you might be. And the way you do that is really making sure, which attorneys general are supposed to do anyway, keep your politics and your job very separate. It's not a political office. Some people wonder why, the Attorney General of the United States isn't elected. Some people wonder why they're even elected in the first place, and there's good reasons for it, I would submit. But it's a job that you, every 4 years, depending on what state you're in, Vermont is every 2 years, but every 4 years in general, you have to run for. You have to learn that game. That game means raising money. That means going to, chicken fries and fish fries and Rotary clubs and so forth. And then when you get elected, you have to take that hat completely off and be the Attorney General and not be susceptible to any of those considerations. And you'll see articles, well, Joe Schmo gave $1,000 to somebody, and therefore that they affected him. Well, you're raising $2 million. That's really not going to be much of an effect on a raise. Look, you have to go out and you have to raise money. There's a couple places where you can get in trouble as an attorney general, some of these hiring outside law firms, and so plaintiffs' firms in particular. So what we did, for example, is we set up a separate group that would do RFPs, and that group within my office would look at those submissions and make a decision. I would not be part of that decision. You have to have institutional checks and balances and walls set up for any place that even the appearance of impropriety could exist doesn't exist. Now, we live in a very different world. So the National Association of Attorneys General is now about 106, 7, 8 years old. Everything was honky-dory with the situation. AGs were different than everybody else. I mentioned at the top that, people in Congress can't get along. They can't agree what day it is. The governors now, it's a very polarized scenario. Attorneys general have always lived under the mantra that you're an attorney general first, go home and do your politics later. And so we all got along. Well, your attorney general here in New York started a whole movement. So Elliot Spitzer was the attorney general. The Chamber of Commerce didn't like that. They found him to be an aggressive, overreaching attorney general who was bad for business. There were others that they thought fit under that ilk, Dick Blumenthal of Connecticut and some others. So they started an organization called RAGA in the year 2000, Republican Attorney General Association. The idea there was to help candidates get rid of these agenda-driven, progressive, liberal, anti-business, what they perceived to be anti-business attorneys general. 2 years later, DAGA responded, and they started. And the world took for the Jim Tierneys who used to go on trips and have meetings with other AGs, not necessarily knowing whether they were Democrat or Republican, but how do you feel about this issue? was now put in jeopardy. And there was this concern that the world as we knew it would fall apart. There was one rule that kept everything together, the glue that kept things together, which was RAGA and DAGA would not go against incumbent AGs. Because if I sat next to Peter Harvie and he was a Republican and my organization DAGA put $3 million in to try and beat him, he withstood that. Now I'm sitting next to him. We're not going to get along too well. It'd be like those guys down on Capitol Hill. My Republican friend from Indiana, they're not friends. He hates that guy. So, that whole thing would happen in AG world. It hasn't really happened. Are there exceptions? Is Ken Cuccinelli from Virginia going to Iowa and campaign against a Tom Miller, the dean of the Democratic AGs? Yes, those are outliers, the exception. But for the general rule, we've been able to maintain these relationships, and we hope that that continues going forward. The last thing I'll say on that, though, is, and this is to the question, there are DAGA and RAGA conferences, and there's something called CWAG, which is a part of the National Association of Attorney Generals. It's the Western AGs. So you'll go to, say, a CWAG conference, which takes corporate money. There'll be 900 people there, 25, 26, 27 AGs. The rest are corporate government representatives or, corporate lobbyists or lawyers, law firms that want access to these AGs. That, to some, seems unseemly, and it's up to the Attorney General to make sure they maintain their distance from any corruption influenced by campaign contributions. And I have to say, most, if not all, do a very good job of doing that.
Well said. I remember some years ago, there was a guy who, in the 1980s, there was a big savings and loans crash in the United States, and it was tied to, some thought, corrupt activities. There were indictments that were brought. One of the persons indicted was a guy named Charles Keating, based in Arizona, who had given oodles and boodles, millions to senators, including one of his senators quite prominently today from Arizona. And Keating was interviewed on 60 Minutes, and he was asked this question in substance. Did you think that your money influenced the activities and your access to government? He said, well, I certainly hope so. And I thought it was one of the most honest responses you can get. I listen sometimes to political figures in my state, in New Jersey. Well, actually by state, New York and New Jersey. But in New Jersey, and some actually, particularly younger political people, say, well, I'm taking the big contribution, but, it's not going to change my point of view. And I laugh, because I say, you're out of your mind. People don't give money to candidates not to have access, not to have influence. I remember once the former AG from New York, your governor, was in a campaign to run for governor, and there was a fundraiser downtown. And I was quoted in the paper, and they said, well, you're a former AG, you're private counsel, you all have come to this fundraiser, and what do you get? I said, we really don't get anything. I said, most AGs who are doing the job straight ahead have to raise money. New York is a big state. I said, but, at best what your clients can get is a fair listen, and at best what your clients can get is a meeting. Well, they print it. In exchange for the money, you get a meeting. And of course, their people went crazy. Like, how could Peter say this? I said, well, will you all relax? What do you think? You think somebody who's giving you $10,000 can't get a meeting? Is that your narrative? Don't be stupid. Don't treat the public like they're stupid. Tell them, yeah, you get a meeting, but you don't get anything extra. I tell clients now that I may have a relationship with a particular AG or AG staff. Look, we can get in and get our message heard, but they're not going to give us anything extra. It's no different than the federal judges I know and the state judges I know. They're not going to give me something that violates the law, and I wouldn't ask them. So if that's the kind of lawyer you want, I'm not that guy. As my daughter would say, I'm not about that life. That's not what I do. You get another lawyer who wants to do something like that. But that isn't who we are. Now, there are people in states who give a lot of money to a governor, and they think somehow that that's going to influence you. And for some AGs, it does. Or they give a lot of money to the party. I think one of the biggest compliments you can ever get in the job is someone says that the person is a straight arrow, the person is not political. not political in the way in which, and Doug is right, the way in which you do the work. Yeah, you may have to raise money, but that doesn't mean that you're political. You don't throw cases. You don't not take initiatives. There may be some room in the matter to work out a resolution based upon gradations of culpability, and you try to maybe work that out. But I remember a very powerful lawyer and a friend was hired by a client when I was AG to come in and see me because I'm sure somebody thought that he could somehow make the criminal charges go away. And I said, I mean, this is a very powerful lawyer, very significant person, and a really, really good friend. And he asked for a private meeting. I gave him the meeting, just the two of us. We sat and talked about it. We exchanged pleasantries. How's your wife? How's your wife? How's your kids? Blah, blah, blah. And we got to it. And I said, I can't do that. He said, no, I understand. He said, I had to ask. I said, I know you had to ask. I said, and you know, if I could do it, I'd do it for you. But I can't do that because it would undermine my entire staff. It would undermine everything we're trying to build here. But you know you're all, he said, I appreciate you giving me the meeting. Well, you're always going to get the meeting. But at the end of the day, you have to make a decision based upon the law and the facts, and you have to just be fair. And again, there is some room. It's no different than you go before a judge, and the judge knows who you are, and you're not quite where you want to be, and you say, Judge, you know, could we maybe push that off for about 90 days? And the judge looks at you and says, no problem. No problem. And that's fair play. And the other side is saying, 90 days, Judge, we should be going in a week. And you go, Judge, I could really use 90 days. Judge says, okay, maybe not 90, I'll give you 70. That's within the bounds of fairness. But what you try to do is just do the job as straight ahead as you can. You try to be right every time, knowing that you can't be. You just can't be. You're going to misjudge some situations, and you're just going to be wrong in some others.
That's great. So now I had my question, and that's exactly what we wanted to talk about, lawyering for whom. And let's see if we have some questions. I'm sure we do.
You all a bunch of chatterboxes.
Yes.
So both of you have talked about some of the challenges that attorneys general face because they are elected because they have to do campaign raising their donations. So I was wondering if you think that it would be a better system to just get rid of elected attorneys general, or you think there's actually some value to that whole process of being elected, getting money from the state?
So I think, did everyone hear, I think the question was, should AGs be elected or appointed? Is that?
By virtue of being appointed, you would get rid of all the campaigning money and politics of it, arguably. Well, let me just say a couple of things. First of all, I'd like to just piggyback on one thing that Peter just said about money. It's interesting, but literally half an hour before I walked in here, I got a call from a reporter about Attorney General Jim Hood, who's the president of NAG, and they're doing a profile on him. And he has gone after Google hard for a lot of things. And we talked about sort of who Jim Hood is, why is he going against Google? Is that a good thing, a bad thing? Because of a lot of things going on Google. One of the things that happens over the internet, as you know, is people steal movies. Right? They'll download movies they don't pay for, music and movies. And the guy asked me, well, is it, some people would say the reason why he's going after Google is to do the bidding of the recording industry of America's work, that they can't do otherwise, that they need the power of an attorney general. And isn't it true that they've also, the RIAA, the recording industry, has given him money? And I said to him, look, unless you can tell me there's a quid pro quo, if you go after Google, we will give you X dollars. There's nothing unusual about that at all. Yeah, it's a little bit like, of course you're going to get the meeting. And that kind of goes back to the when Clinton got in trouble for having big donors or friends stay in the Lincoln bedroom. Well, who's he going to have stay in the Lincoln bedroom? His enemies or the people that vote? It makes sense. So the recording industry gave Jim Hood money after he did work that they appreciate. I said it's no different than a citizen giving him money because they think he's doing a good job on behalf of the citizens. So that's sort of after the fact money, and it sort of reminds me of sort of what happens on the money side. And that dovetails into your question, is it better to have sort of a not elected attorney general? So we just went through this. I live in Bethesda, Maryland, right outside of Washington. And a very good friend that I've known since childhood just became the first attorney general of the District of Columbia. His name's Carl Racine. And And I had a lot of discussions with his predecessor, who I also am very good friends with, named Irv Nathan, who thought it was a good idea to have the Attorney General of D.C., just pretend it's a state for a second, continue to be appointed by the mayor, or in New Jersey's case, be appointed by the governor. And the reality is, I truly believe, that there's a very strong role for an independently elected Attorney General to be independent, an independent constitutional officer from the governor to say, no, you can't do that. That is not right. That's not supported by the law or the Constitution. So what would be the best manner of getting that person there? They have to be appointed by somebody, which maybe that's why the Tennessee model is actually better. I would argue the Tennessee model is better than the model where a governor appoints the person, because they're just a hatchet person for the governor. I just think you have to, like every other job, if it's somebody who gets influenced and improperly motivated by money, and you can sort of see that, and their decisions are based on campaign contributions, they have to be held accountable for that. But I do think there's a value in having, as much as I hate raising money, it's my least favorite thing, I think there's a value in at least having the politics of it be part of it. Now, the Supreme Court messed up the whole thing with Citizens United by somehow thinking that money is speech, which I still don't understand, but that is the law of the land. That makes it even harder to actually function independently than it once was.
And let me take a shot at that if I can. As Doug mentioned, I served as Attorney General for 6 years, having been elected by the legislature. I'd been in the legislature. Then I ran for governor and lost. Big primary, big general election. And I stayed on as Attorney General. I was a better Attorney General in my last 4 years because I had run for office. I had met people, I had heard things, I saw a lot of I was enforcing the law in my first 6 years, and then I could actually see the results when I campaigned, and a lot of the results were good, but a lot of the results weren't so good. There were a lot of unintended consequences, which because I hadn't been elected, I didn't know, because I wasn't actually part of the state. That's my first point. Second point, it doesn't make any difference. We have very non-political U.S. attorneys appointed by the president, such as Chris Christie. Okay? We have very non-political attorneys general appointed by the governor of New Hampshire, Kelly Ayotte, career prosecutor. She resigns. She runs for the U.S. Senate. So it doesn't necessarily work, the idea of and we have other people who are elected who are, as unpolitical. You think we know the names that are totally non-political. So the key to me is independent. You don't want the governor controlling the attorney general. Governor appoints the Attorney General of New Jersey, but can't remove him.
That's right.
You've got to be independent. Only in Wyoming and Alaska can the governor remove the Attorney General, and then you get Sarah Palin and her best friend from Wasilla. Peter?
Yeah. No, I mean, look, you cannot have a politics-free model. There are advantages and disadvantages to each model. The one thing the framers of the 1947 Constitution did in New Jersey, and Jim just pointed it out, was they allowed the governor to nominate, the Senate to confirm, but once you are confirmed, you are a constitutional officer and you can only be removed for cause. And I mean, it has to be some real cause. Like, you get caught violating the law in some way, a criminal law. And then you have to be removed through impeachment and so forth. But it's a model that gives you great strength and enough protection, particularly in New Jersey, if you want it. What you have to be mindful of is who is the governor. New Jersey adopted the federal model. So the governor has literally 8,000 appointments. I don't mean figuratively. I mean all the trial courts, superior courts, all the administrative courts where there's a vacancy, prosecutors, 21 county prosecutors, the Supreme Court, commissions and authorities, all the licensing boards. I mean, all of that is governors, is the governor's appointment. So, the question really becomes, what model do you want? Because both have politics in it. You just have to be sure you get somebody in the job who really is trying to do the job straightforward.
Let's have a question. We squeeze another one in. Yes, Nassim.
Without giving any names, could you maybe tell us a situation where you were strongly discouraged to prosecute a big corporation, and how did you deal with it?
I mean, I can't, nothing jumps to mind as an example of prosecuting a corporation is a little, going out, like prosecuting for fraud or when they're getting money, going after them for whatever issue is a little different than prosecuting a person. But, it happens all the time and it happens never. It happens never in the sense that anyone ever, at least to me, my 8 years as Attorney General, 8 years as State's Attorney, and 6 years as Assistant U.S. Attorney, no one ever said, here, if you do this, I'll do that. Or there was never any insinuation for me of some sort of quid pro quo like that. There's genetically modified GMOs. DuPont will come in and give you a position on their view. Monsanto will come in and give the position on their view. And you actually want that. I mean, for the most part, there's very lacrosse and maybe criminal law and maybe the environment. There are a few things I know a little bit about. The rest I don't know much about at all.
Lacrosse was first.
Yes. Yeah. Especially, right in season, like right now. But there's things but the rest of it I don't know anything about. So I don't know about these harmonic, how these organisms are produced and what that means, what's a GMO, what's not GMO. I want to hear from both sides. I want my staff, more importantly, to hear from both sides, and we can make an informed, educated decision. So we're lobbied all the time, and do DuPont and Monsanto then contribute to my campaign either beforehand or afterward? I don't really know. I could find out, but it would certainly have no influence on me one way or the other. But yes, and so they come in and they try and influence you, but never, I gave you X dollars, you now need to do. Did you guys watch The Good Wife? I think she just got elected state's attorney, and the people come in and I need to appoint this person. That to me never happened in real life. The one thing we could actually do, the one thing I was actually able to do a little bit was get people non-paying internships in our office. So you get a stack of law students after the first year want to come work at the AG's office. Somebody would call me, friend, donor or not, and say, hey, can you get somebody a job? And I can say, hey, we take a look at this person or something like that. And doesn't matter because no one's paying them. We needed the help. So but other than that, I think the only times I ever would be called about something like that.
Well, see, something like that did happen with me on more than one occasion.
It's New Jersey.
Yeah, in New Jersey. I had a senator once who invited me to open up an investigation against a political rival. And it was a private meeting, and I asked him what was it about. Come up and let's meet. So we sat in his home, and he's explaining to me what a bad guy this other guy is, and how I should open up an investigation on this other guy. Well, of course, he wanted me to do it so he could leak it. And I knew exactly what he was doing. And I said, well, I don't discuss investigations. See, in New Jersey, the AG has about a third of the government. Again, it's the federal model. You supervise the county prosecutors. You have an independent division of criminal justice with investigators and lawyers. You have gaming enforcement. So, for example, we did the investigation on the company trying to get licensed to work in the casino that ultimately uncovered the work that had been done for free, nearly free, for Bernie Kerik. And so that information was turned over to the Bronx DA, who ultimately convicted him, but he's resurfaced. And it happened again with somebody in the governor's office who was angry with a Catholic diocese because there are two major hospitals in New Brunswick, and both are fabulous hospitals. One, Robert Wood Johnson, named after the founder of Johnson & Johnson, oodles and boodles of money, and St. Peter's. Well, St. Peter's has probably one of the best neonatal care units, called NICU units, in the world. I mean, there are kids there who wouldn't be alive today, but for that neonatal unit. Robert Wood Johnson wanted to start one. And so you have to get approval, state approval. And you get all of these objections. And of course, the diocese was objecting to Robert Wood Johnson getting it. And somebody in the governor's office didn't like it. Somebody in state government didn't like it. So I get a call from some unnamed person who says, why don't you open up an investigation into the diocese? I mean, surely there must be some kids who've been abused by somebody in that diocese. And I go, well, first of all, we don't do that. No, we don't do that. If you have credible information, then I suggest here's who you take that information to. And sure enough, And here's why, aside from all the reasons why you know it's improper to do that, and secondly, even if you were going to do it, it's improper to talk to them about it. And thirdly, here's what happens. So 2 weeks later, after the dust has settled, they worked everything out, and it turns out that they've reached an accommodation. Oh, you know, Peter, that thing we talked to you about? Oh, don't worry about it anymore. That's why you don't use your office as a political tool. Aside from all the reasons that you can think of on your own, that's the other reason why. It's a weapon.
All right, so we may have time for one more question. I will say this, though, and we've got to be, this is too rosy a picture we're painting here. It is much more difficult today than it even was 2 or 3 years ago. For you to take that meeting with the state senator, it's a one-on-one meeting, they leak it anyway. Doesn't make a difference what you said. We don't do that here. And you are down the road on social media chasing, why did you have this secret meeting in the home, and the senator has one version, what's your version, and you're there trying to do it. So it is becoming more difficult as the public has less and less credibility.
It's funny you say that.
I met with Congressman Frank the other day, and former Congressman Frank, and one of the things he said he says, I like Jon Stewart like every other good liberal would like it. He says, but couldn't he just once say that government had done something right? I mean, that the left and the right are the same in their capacity to bring down government, always with a cynic, always with a joke, always with a disbelieving, so that your generation has very little to believe that if a state senator, you went to the state senator's home?
Yes.
All right, so the attorney general goes to the state senator home.
I wasn't AG there. I was first assistant,
all right, so
but
who
I
are
was
we
in
gonna
charge
believe?
of criminal justice.
So in other words, you can see, I do believe it's much more difficult, and the speed with which it goes out makes it much harder for the good news to catch up.
Well, what happened ultimately down the road is when, and this is the game that you get into, because you don't do what they want to do, they take a shot at you later on. Well, I think that, you could do a little bit more on the corruption front. I think you could do a little bit more, and you know where it's coming from. You know the behind-the-scenes game, because some of these guys have great relationships with reporters, because reporters don't care where they get the story from. And you can almost, I can read a story in New Jersey, and I can almost tell where it came from. And it's only because I've been in the swirl so much that usually by the end of the story, they'll have a quote from somebody, and that's the hero of the story. And that generally is a tip-off. They're in the mix, feeding this to the reporter. Or the second story about it. Somebody will be quoted, that's the hero. Here's the standard bearer.
It's always the last paragraph in the story.
That's the person responsible for the story.
That's what you look for. We have one more question over here? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it actually relates to the last point about cynicism and trust in government and all this. I just took the NPRE, which I know a bunch of us did, and you learn about the different standard with regard to judges running for election. And there's a much higher bar with two things specifically. Asking for money directly is completely barred, and then the standard of conduct in general relates to the appearance of impropriety, as opposed to the NPRE is almost treated more like a tax code if you're not a judge, right? Like where's the loophole rather than. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on why not impose that same standard, because a line was drawn earlier about the difference between.
Right. Well, first of all, it doesn't work for judges. As we just saw, if you read the articles about the Wisconsin election last week, the judges don't ask, but everybody sort of knows. And it's the everybody who sort of knows may be running a casino in Nevada and all of a sudden has a great interest in who's going to be on the Supreme Court in Wisconsin. So I'm not sure that rule
Well, one exception,
work,
Joe, then.
but I should
Jim,
let
one
my
exception.
speakers answer.
One exception. In
Take my class if you want to know what I. Go ahead.
I was in a series of cases that you actually, Jim, called stupid, and they were. This particular group was in Alabama, group of cases. We were in Pennsylvania, the AWP cases. Yeah. You remember when these cases were floating around. Average wholesale pricing. I won't bore you with the details.
Yeah, you only have 2 minutes.
But here was the relevance of it. In Alabama, there was a law firm there, a big plaintiff's law firm, that has a partner whose sole job is to raise money for judges. That's his job. And he raises oodles and boodles of money for judges. Some of these judges run uncontested, in part because they have a war chest that's contributed to by this lawyer and law firm. So, to your point, what do you think happens when that law firm and their lawyers show up in court?
for one of the judges whose race they have ran for years and won. Well, you get a different measure of justice there, and you know it. So you just have to understand who you're fighting against, because they've tilted the field on you.
Yeah, I think the judges is the extreme. If you sort of always look at these things in kind of spectrum, I think the judges are the farthest thing over. I've been pushing, in Maryland we have judicial elections, and I just testified last week, I think it was, to get rid of judicial elections and move them to retention elections. And there's three main reasons. One is the money. The Supreme Court Caperton case put that into question, where there's the coal company spending $3 million to get rid of a judge. I mean, that's obvious what they're doing and why they're doing it. The second is the politics of it. You just don't want judges going to the same things that we have to go to when they can't talk about, by definition, can't talk about current cases. I remember driving through Texas one time and listening to a radio ad for a judge, and literally the radio ad said, anytime that a drug dealer or suspected drug dealer comes before me, I'm going to lock him up and throw away the key. I think you really want your judges to opine on the facts of that case and the law as it applies to the case, not politics. And lastly, what we have a problem with in Maryland is diversity. And that's actually where I came at it from. We've never, in the state of Maryland, with the judicial elections, we've never had an African-American, Asian-American, Latino ever elected in a contested race to this minute anywhere in all of Western Maryland, all the way anywhere in Southern Maryland, or anywhere on the Eastern Shore. And we've had plenty of examples where they've gotten to lose. And nobody knows the name. It's like a lineman in football. I mean, nobody knows the name of their judge, right? So what they literally would hand out flyers. This is the African-American person who's your judge. This is the white person who wants to be your judge. And lo and behold, the white person wins every time. So there's a lot of issues, in my view, around it. So people say, well, you're giving too much power to the governor to a point. But that's a little bit like people should think about that when they're electing the president who's on the Supreme Court. Same thing should happen in those elections.
Well, you've had tell them about your two chief justices, though. You're remarkable. Maryland is remarkable in this regard.
Right. So because the two appellate courts, the Court of Appeals, which is our equivalent to the Supreme Court, I guess the same as Maryland, and Court of Special Appeals, the two appellate courts are appointed, we have great diversity. So we had a Morgan person, General Harvie's, as the chief judge. Lawrence was the first African American chief judge. Now we have a woman who's the chief judge, and that probably wouldn't happen if it were an election.
Okay, we are done. Let's have a round of applause for General Gansler. Come on down and ask him questions.